Okay. Hello and welcome to the first session of Ana Longo's Transformations of Dialectic, Idealism, Materialism, and Recursivity. I'll start by giving a brief introduction to the seminar. So, since Plato, dialectic has been considered a sound philosophical method for seeking truth. Dialectic was meant to provide reasons for accepting and refusing claims within a dialogue in order to highlight the distinctions between opinions about the real versus real knowledge. However, as a philosophical method, dialectic has been criticized with respect to its ambitions, procedures, and meaning. Kant's Transcendental dialectic is the analysis of the antinomies of reason, the illusions that prevent reason from accepting the limits of knowledge and the finitude of our understanding. Hegel showed us that the contradictions that reason encounters while seeking truth are productive steps towards the production of knowledge. This way, he inaugurated the modern dialectics. His dialectic, as the historical unfolding of truth through contradictions, influenced Marx and Engels, Materialism, but while becoming the explanatory dynamics of social, political, and economic conflicts. Since then, dialectic has undertaken further transformations into different directions. Materialism, Althusser, Deleuze, Badiou, as critical theory, Adorno, Habermas, as recursive logic, Gödel, von Foster, Turing, as abductive logic, Peirce, Popper, and as inferentialism, Sellers and Random. This seminar aims not only to describe the transformations of dialectic, but investigates how, as the method for seeking truth, it can serve our contemporary needs to take responsibility for knowledge in order to unfold the future. The seminar is articulated around weekly selected readings following a chronological order and different opposing perspectives. It will cover ancient, modern, and contemporary philosophy from both the continental and the analytic traditions. Through the proposed readings, we will explain the philosophical strategies that motivate specific transformations of the dialectical method and the consequences of the specific moves on the meaning of reason and its objectives. We will reflect on the role of dialectics for present philosophy and how they can be used critically to address the rhetorics of liberalism. Ana Longo is Doctor of Aesthetics and teaches at the University Paris Panthéon-Sorbonne. Her research concerns the genesis of the conditions of experience at the crossroads of several disciplines, art, mathematics, and science. She has been the author and editor of several books, such as The Genesis of the Transcendental, Breaking the Spell, Speculative Realism Under Discussion, Time Without Becoming, and Il divenire della conoscenza, estetica e contingenza del reale. She currently teaches at the Critical Studies Department in CalArts. Anna, please take it away.
Thank you, Adnan. Hello, everybody, and thank you for being here. So we're going to start by a short introduction today. But first, I think we have some issue about the presentation that you will give during the seminar. I think if it's like it was last year, I think you are supposed to present, all of you, like a 10 minutes presentation during the seminar, and to write a short essay to be submitted at the end. So it would be nice to start having a sort of list or a schedule for your presentations. So I think that you are kind of 13 or 13 people, I mean, in the list I have. And we have 8 classes. So 7 because one is today. So I think that we could start from the first week of March, which is, I think, So not next week, but the following, which is March the 7th. So we will have kind of 5 classes for all your presentations. So it would be, the perfect thing would be to have kind of 3 people any Saturday starting from March the 7th. And also the respondents, I think. So for the presentation, I think if you agree that you can choose a topic dealing with dialectics. So in the classes, we are covering some authors which are concerned with dialectic, but not all, because it's impossible. It's a very wide field. So for example, an idea could be to present an author we are not dealing with in the seminar, or to go deeper in some of the issue of a seminar, so some of the author of a seminar. And the presentation can be a sort of draft for the final essay that you will write at the end. So it's really short presentation, so 10 minutes. It will be kind of addressing the idea for your final essay. And in this way, we will be able to talk about it, to discuss it, and to provide you with ideas for your final essay. So if you agree with it, I think that you can think about it this week, and we will try to make this schedule next week. Is that okay for you?
Sounds good.
Okay. So yes, so let's start from this introduction. I will leave some room at the end for questions and for discussing the whole thing. So I don't know if you had the list of the reading. It's a very big PDF with all the excerpts and the readings, the text that we will read. So I don't think we will read everything because it's a lot. So I think we will analyze some text which is important, and we will deal with some other texts in a more superficial way. So I try not to cover all developments of dialectic because it's too much. But I try to have examples from different positions and try to see how dialectic is important today and what is the future of dialectic in some way. So then it depends on you. So we can try to go deeper in topics that you're more interested in. So I'm open to this. So probably there are parts that you know better than others, and then it's dependent also on your personal interests. So maybe at the end of this class, after the introduction, you could tell me what are the topics you are more interested in, or what you would like to treat in a more deep way, in a deeper way. And so we can also try to discuss together the program of a seminar. So for the introduction, I'm gonna try to sketch a sort of history of dialectics. It will be kind of superficial from a certain point of view, because I try to cover a long period since the beginning of the dialectic in ancient Greece to the most contemporary experiments in artificial intelligence. So then I will leave, of course, room for discussion and for questions. So first, I think it's important to define dialectic. So as you know, I think the term dialectic is coming from ancient Greek, and it was called dialektike, and it's a word which is related to dialogue. So a first definition can be that it's a sort of discourse between two or more people holding different points of view about a subject, but wishing to establish the truth through argument. So it's a method for discussing and discussing in order to find the truth or to reach an agreement. So it can be understood as a form of reasoning based upon dialogue, which is made up by arguments and counter arguments. With people supporting a thesis and then an antithesis in order to come to some synthesis or the refutation of one of the two propositions, or an improvement of the dialogue. So we have different viewpoints. So we can see dialectic as a method for refuting propositions, or to create a synthesis or an improvement of knowledge. So the history of dialectic is a very complex one. So the term dialectic acquired multiple and also conflicting meanings. So it has been identified with rhetoric, with sophistry, or for example, in Plato, it's a movement from the sensible to the spiritual. We also know that for Kant, dialectic was a sort of illusion of reason. So Kant disqualified dialectic as a method for seeking truth. In any case, Kant reestablished in a certain way the interest for dialectic that was forgotten at the beginning of the Enlightenment period. So we know in modern philosophy, like in Descartes, of the big rationalistic systems, there is no dialectic. So Descartes or Spinoza or Leibniz, they're not choosing dialectic. So Kant reestablished, in a way, dialectic, and this reestablishment, even though he was skeptical about the possibility of a true, a productive dialectic, he has this merit of bringing back this methodology, which has been developed later, even though in many different ways. So it has been developed as a sort of explanation for causal pattern of historical development, or as a branch of philosophical ontology, or I mean for organizing the history of thought, and also a way of testing the process for scientific theories. So we will see all these different meanings, or all these different developments. But I think it's important also to see why it is important to focus on dialectic today. And I think that the reason is that dialectic, or the history of dialectic, exhibits the epistemological process which is at work in a setting of socially conditioned interactions. So dialectic is important in order to see how knowledge is produced in social interaction. So my focus is on the dialogical version of dialectic, which is associated with disputation and debate. And so the goal is to see what epistemological lesson can be drawn from this dialectical methodology in philosophy, while meaning that dialectic is a sort of theory for the unfolding of knowledge. So a first thing that must be stressed is that, of course, at any time we have different opinions, and at any time people disagree about their opinions. So there are, of course, conflict, disagreement, and whatever. But if this is not enough to have a dialectic, so what is important is that these disagreement, these differences of opinions are defended, and these opinions are assumed, and people are engaging in their own opinion. So it's not just, okay, this is my opinion and that's it, but they need to commit to the truth of their opinion, and so providing reason for supporting them. And it's only at this stage that we can have a dialectic. So a dialectic comes into play when people start defending a view by using rational arguments. So the adoption of dialectic is important when we are systematically testing the acceptability of the standpoints which are at issue. So there are some rules, and so dialectics is this set of rules for the discussion procedure. This discussion is a discussion which is ruled because we are not choosing the best opinion, or we are not just discussing according to emotional reasons, but according to rational reasons. So it's not a matter of convincing by any kind of mean, like emotional or means based on persuasion or sentiment or prejudice, but it's way of convincing which is based on the acceptability of a standpoint. And for this we need a sort of critical standards of reasonableness of for the discussion. So dialectic is really concerned with these standards for accepting or endorsing a belief or an opinion. Then another important point is that dialectic is a process. So the other important part is that dialectic is addressing the rationality of conceptual change. So it's not just to define what is rational today or what are the standards which are assumed to be true or functional today, but we need to address the possibility of a change in the standards of rationality itself. So dialectic is addressing the becoming of knowledge and the possibility of improving knowledge, and also the methodology which leads to this improvement of knowledge. So these are just a sort of general definition and a definition of the goals of the classes. And so now I will start my short history of dialectic. So in the list of the readings that you have, we will start from Hegel. So you don't have readings about classic or ancient philosophy, so Plato or Aristotle. So I'm going to introduce this beginning of dialectic now. So the term dialectic has been introduced, or I mean, it's famous because it was introduced by Plato, describing the methodology employed by Socrates. However, dialectic existed before in the Greek classical period, which is the 5th or 4th century before Christ. So according to Aristotle, the person who invented dialectic was Zeno of Elea. According to other theories, the root idea of dialectic is in Heraclitus' philosophy. So Heraclitus is this philosopher who said that being is the product of opposing forces. So there is this kind of productive tension of the contraries, which produce anything. So being is the product of this war of the opposites. So dialectic could be seen as the outset of this idea when it's embodied in a discursive practice. So it's a sort of production which occurs thanks to the tension or the contradiction between arguments in a dialogic practice. Anyway, the most famous application of dialectic is the Socratic method. And the Socratic method is coming from or is opposed to this other practice, which is sophistry. So basically, sophistry is a sort of dialectic, or Platonic or Socratic dialectic. Dialectic is defining itself against sophistry. So there is something in common between dialectic and sophistry. So the sophists were known to use arguments in order to impress or persuade the audience, in order to accept a specific point of view. So usually the sophist is a person who is able to use arguments in order to persuade. Socrates' view is an alternative method, because according to Socrates, the goal is not to persuade or to prove an argument, but to prove that no knowledge is possible, or that people who think they possess the truth are not really supporting something that can be rationally shared. According to Socrates, dialectic is used against the sophist, showing that the sophist does not possess the truth he pretends to have. Sorry. So Socrates appears in the Plato's early dialogues. So we have to make this distinction between the early dialogues and the later dialogues by Plato. So in the first dialogues, we have the Socratic method, so first way of using dialectic, and we have in the later dialogues a more sophisticated dialectic, which is a real method for seeking the truth. At the beginning, while following this Socratic method, dialectic is still evolving, we could say, in Plato. So in these early dialogues, we have Socrates who is investigating the nature of some ethical concepts such as justice or virtue. So concepts or notions which are very difficult to be defined. So usually Socrates is asking questions in order to drive his opponent to a contradiction. So these inquiries consist of a series of arguments which end in a sort of puzzlement or a sort of aporia. Socrates is not proving an argument and is not using dialectic in order to positively affirming something, is only showing that most of the beliefs are inconsistent. And so dialogues such as Euthyphro or Ion, they end with this contradictory result, with this aporia. And the goal is to show the awareness of ignorance. So Socrates is wise, not because he knows the truth, but is wise because he knows that he doesn't know. So in this way, it's a sort of dialectic which is set against the sophist, was the he thinks to know the truth. But it's not really a positive dialectic. We have a more positive use of dialectics in Plato's later dialogues, such as Parmenides or the Republic, where Socrates is no more the main character. So there is this sort of development of the concept of dialectic in Plato's philosophy. To understand this change, we have to recall this distinction in Plato's philosophy between ideas and appearances. So there is this distinction between the appearances, sensible appearances in objects, and the ideas. So the ideas are the truth, and objects are like shadows of this truth. So real dialectic is a sort of method for elevating from these shadows, from appearances, to the truth of the ideas. So it's according to this aim that Plato transmuted the Socratic dialectic into a process of inquiry, which is meant to clarify concepts and to look for the truth. And one important thing is that the truth is established on the side of the best argument rather than on the side of the best arguer. So for the sophist, what is important is the subject, so its capacity of persuading the audience. So it's the best arguer who is winning. According to Plato, what is important is to find the criteria for the best argument. This is a very important step in the development of dialectic. So dialectic is no more a mere gymnastic for thinking, like it was, for example, in the first dialogues, but it became a sort of pursuit of rational inquiry. And the idea is to go beyond appearances and to go beyond things. Of course, what we keep from the Socratic method is that this truth is beyond the surface. So what is important is to go beyond opinions. So the step of showing that opinions are inconsistent is still important, but opinions are inconsistent because truth is beyond. So dialectic became this procedure to go beyond opinions. So we have few definitions of dialectic in Plato, even though he never made explicit this methodology, so we can reconstruct it, but there is no real treatise on dialectic in Plato. So for example, in the Republic, he says that dialectic is an inquiry into the truth of things by arguments. In Phaedo, it said that dialectic seeks through rational discourse alone, without using sense perception, to discern the true nature of a thing, and then that it is a method of discursively interactive inquiry for grasping authentic ideas of each thing. So what is interesting here is that it's a way of seeking the truth through rational discourse alone and without using sense perception. So here we have some ideas about dialectic that will be developed by philosophy later. So it's a rational procedure, a rational methodology for investigating what is beyond sensual appearances. And so it's a way to go to the forms or to the ideas. Of course, according to Plato, we cannot actually know the forms of the ideas. So it's ambiguous in the sense that we have to look for them, to look for this knowledge, but it's not sure that we can get there. So for example, in the Apology of Socrates, Socrates says that is happy to die because it's only in death that the truth will be unveiled. So there is a sort of mystic which is still in the Platonic method. So since we are embodied, since we are living creature in a world of appearances, we cannot really get to the truth while living, but the mind can know the truth, but without a body. So according to Plato, we have the possibility of looking for truth, but it's not sure that we can get actually there. So dialectic is a methodology for seeking the truth, but Plato never explained what this truth is. There's no a possession of this truth. So it's not like in Hegel, for example, where absolute knowledge can be reached. So here we have this ambiguity of dialectic between a method to show contradictions and to show that we don't have knowledge, and a methodology which aim to the ideas, or to get to the forms, the ideas, or this truth. Anyway, in the Republic, Plato make explicit that, I quote, dialectic does not treat its hypothesis as first principle, but as hypothesis in the literal sense. Things lay down as a flight of steps which mount up to something that is not hypothetical, but the first principle of all. Then, having grasped the dialectical, turns back, and proceeding via the consequences that depend upon it, it descends to a conclusion using no sensible object at all, but only forms, moving from one to another and terminating with the same. In this way, dialectic is superior to the special science because the students do not go back to first principle, but proceed from otherwise unexamined hypotheses. So dialectic is the keystone of science because it's an instrument of rational inquiry. So once we have these hypotheses, we can try to use them in order to show the legitimacy of the opinions that we support. So we can say that it's a methodology of rational inquiry, which would allow to transit from the condition to the transcendent forms. And in this way, it is opposed to the pseudo-dialectic of the sophist. It's a method for transit from appearance to reality, where reality is the reality of the form or the ideas. And there is this method that Plato introduced at the end of in the last dialogues, which is this method of differentiation or distinction, which is important in order to show the legitimacy of opinion. So it's a way of showing if an opinion or a supposed truth can be traced from the corresponding idea. So we can see this as a way of clarifying concept, or a way for make concepts more precise, and that this will be a very important practice for later philosophy. So also Aristotle had a theory about dialectic, even though he used this in a totally different way. So the book where Aristotle dealt with dialectic is the Topics, and in this book is describing the dialectical process, saying that it's very different. So it's a method which is not like mathematical or logical proof process. So in the previous book, which was the Analytics, Aristotle described this method for logical proof. And in the Topics, it describes dialectic, and these are two different methodology. So dialectic is not a process for proving thesis. It's another kind of inquiry. So according to Aristotle, we have two different ways, or two different parts of knowledge. So we have demonstrative knowledge, which is the scientific method. So according to him, what we can call the scientific method. And we have then this dialectical methodology, which is a way of proving the axioms, we could say, or the principle of science. So in the demonstrative way of thinking, demonstrative reason, we start from some principles, some axioms, and then we have a deduction. But science cannot legitimize the axioms. So in order to provide a sort of legitimation or justification of the axioms, we have this other way of knowing, which is dialectic, according to Aristotle. So it's a way of reasoning that establish the credibility of the first principles. So there is no, according to Aristotle, proof of the first principles, because the first principles are first principles. So in order to investigate this first principle, we need a way of thinking, a way of reasoning, which is the dialectical methodology. So it's a sort of proto-scientific investigation, a sort of heuristic investigation, which is a mean to secure the first principle, the archive, which cannot be proved. So the principles cannot themselves be demonstrated, but we can use dialectic in order to put this principle as hypothesis and see if we can agree on this hypothesis in order to set science as a method for knowledge. So dialectic in this way is not producing knowledge, it's just fixing the first principles or the hypothesis from which we can establish science or scientific knowledge. So in the topic, Aristotle says, I quote, dialectic is useful useful regarding the basic principle of a science. For the first principles are primary to all else. It is necessary to deal with them via the endoxa, the accepted plausibility of each issue. Just this belongs peculiarly and most appropriately to dialectic and points the way to the fundamental principles of all inquiries. So while Plato dialectic was conceived as a science in itself, so Plato dialectic aimed to be this sort of absolute knowledge of the ideas. So knowledge was the end of the dialectic. According to Aristotle, dialectic is not the end, but it's the beginning. In the sense that dialectic is supporting the first hypothesis from which it's possible to develop a science. And Aristotle was really concerned with the knowledge of reality. So there was a different approach to knowledge. So according to Plato, dialectic was pointing to these ideas. According to Aristotle, dialectic is fixing the first principle in order for a science of the real, a knowledge of the real to be possible. So Aristotle proceed in this way. So instead of looking for the differences between concepts and ideas like Plato, so for Plato there was this method of differentiation, of dividing. For Aristotle, the dialectical process is a process of looking for commonalities and generalities. So for example, the idea of substance, the principle of substance is conceived like what is in common, what is shared by anything. So the method is to look for this common genus or the generality. So it's not a way, it's not a dialectic of differentiation, but it's a dialectic which is looking for commonalities. So the idea is that we can disagree. Of course, there are different opinions, but for Aristotle, in order to disagree, we need to agree on the definition of a term. So dialectic is a way of defining the first terms, so to agree on the first terms in order to disagree or to have a discussion which follows from a common ground. So the idea is I have a dialectic which is providing a common ground of agreement, so an agreement about the definitions of the terms, the definition of the first principles, in order to be able to disagree, because it's not possible, according to Aristotle, to disagree without having something in common, which is disagreement on the terms. So we can have then this demonstrative reason, but in order to have different demonstration, different proof for different sciences, we need this first agreement, and dialectic is meant to provide this common ground, these first principles. So for Aristotle, what is important is that dialectic is not something which take us to a fundamental truth, but it's really what provides the embryonic start of any cognitive enterprise. So then we have different developments of dialectic in later Greek philosophy or Roman philosophy, and like in the Stoics or Epicurean dialectics, but I'm not talking about it. There are some examples of dialectical arguments also in medieval philosophy. And I'm going to skip all this to get to Kant. So Kant reintroduced dialectic after a big historical break. So as we said before, we don't have a dialectical methodology, for example, in Descartes or in the big rationalistic systems, mostly because they were centered on the subject. So, for example, Descartes philosophy is, we could say, a solipsistic philosophy, and dialectic, on the contrary, is related to the discussion. It's related to intersubjectivity, to the confrontation of different opinions and arguments. So there is no much space for dialectic in solipsistic systems like Descartes. So Kant went back to dialectic, even though, as we said, he thinks that dialectic is not a methodology for seeking the truth. But in any case, that was important because it opened up the way to modern philosophy development of dialectic. So for Kant, dialectic is revealing the error of reasons. So it's a way of using reason in a non-legitimate way. So it's not a production of knowledge, it's a sort of speculation in the bad sense of the term. So I quote Kant, such reasoning will always be a logic of illusion that is dialectical. For abstract reason yields nothing whatever about the content of our cognition, but merely sets the formal conditions of their accordance with the understanding, which do not characterize objects and instead are quite indifferent to them. For this reason, we have chosen to designate this part of logic dialectic, in the sense of a critique of dialectical illusion. So dialectic is a sort of reasoning producing illusions. So the illusions of reason, the ideas of reason. In this dialectic, Kant shows that there are antinomies. So reason, one is free from the empirical given, from the sensible given, when it's not taking into account sense impression, is free to produce its own idea, its own discourse, and this leads to antinomies. And so we have 4 antinomies. One is about the universe. So the question is as the universe a beginning in time and space, or is it infinite in time and space? Other antinomies are about substances. So it's complex substances made up of simple parts. Then the third is about causes. So it's about the first cause, and so it's about freedom. So if there is a necessity, a causal necessity in nature, so freedom is not possible. And the third one is about God, so the existence of a necessary being. So according to Kant, we have a conflict of reason, because in these problems we can support opposite opinions. So we can say, for example, that the world, the universe has a beginning in time or not, and we can have arguments for both. But since we have arguments for both, both are false. So Kant shows that when dealing with these ideas, such God or the universe taken as real things, real totalities, reason cannot but end up in contradictions. So the problem is that reason is trying to make of an idea a real object, so and trying to think of the conditions as something which is real. So for example, is thinking of the origin of a first cause as something which is conditioning reality, rather than thinking that the real condition is the understanding itself. So the problem, according to Kant, is that categories or the transcendental a priori are the real conditions of things, and we cannot basically address things in themselves or the real conditions of our knowledge. So it's impossible to achieve, so for us, it's impossible to achieve this absolute knowledge, even though we can have the idea of a thing in itself, or a real origin, or a real first cause determining things are as they are. Anyway, this is not an object that we can actually know. So all these fallacies of reason are determined by the application of categories to objects which are not objects that we can know, so objects which are not sensible. So the universe as a totality cannot be an object of experience. So there is no possible knowledge of this totality, for example.
Anna?
Yes?
Would you be open to a question, or would you prefer that we wait if we have a question?
Okay, we can have questions.
Okay, I have a question,
Yes.
concerning the what is sometimes called the Transcendental Dialectic in Kant. And I'm curious if you would agree with this characterization that with Kant, the dialectic is sort of a pseudo-logic of error, this process of reasoning that brings to light flaws and faults of misreasoning. I mean, you quoted where Kant sees the knowledge of objects as possible and sees the dialectic or dialectics as a practice, as a matter of sort of revealing the pathology of reason, that reasoning in abstraction from sensuous conditions alone produces a kind of error, or it allows for confusion, the conflation of sensuous knowledge as objective knowledge. So for Kant, dialectic thinking is an exercise in misreasoning the product of a fallacy, and sort of necessarily rooted, or maybe better yet, anchored in the systematic study of phenomenon, and thus really what in the Critique of Pure Reason sort of needs to be outpouched from metaphysics. This is sort of like, you know, Kant wants to scientificize metaphysics and essentially take out this kind of sensuous engagement with the objects in order to, as he would, you know, claim, bring parity between metaphysics and, by extension, philosophy with the sciences. Would you agree with, you know, this being sort of, and I feel like this pathologizing is also explicitly why with Hegel, the movement in being and thought occurring through contradiction, this is sort of why people like Todd McGowan and such will be, and even Zizek will be, you know, so ready to see Hegel as a proto-psychoanalytic thinker, because there is a pathologizing to Hegelian dialectic and contradiction.
Yeah, so I agree in the sense that for example, in the critique of judgment, there is a way of reconsidering in a certain way these ideas. So it's not only negative. I mean, it does not produce a scientific knowledge, of course, but it's not useless. It's not meaningless in a certain way. Also because, for example, when looking for freedom or for morality, these ideas are important as ideals of reason. So like something that we cannot know, but something, ideas that orient action or orient our behavior. So they became meaningful, for example, in moral issues, or they are meaningful in aesthetics, even though they do not provide a real knowledge. So yes, now I just stressing the negative part. So I'm just stressing this idea that Kant say, okay, no, dialectic is not leading to truth, meaning that, okay, truth is real knowledge, so knowledge in the sense of scientific knowledge, whereas intended knowledge as knowledge of reality, so scientific description of the real with criteria of correspondence, if it's possible. But it's, of course, it's not totally useless. So I think it's kind of almost half of a critique of pure reason, which is about ideas of reasons, illusions, and all the mistakes. So they were kind of important for him. And so I think that in some way it put the basis for the developments in idealist philosophy, like Fichte or Schelling or Hegel. They were all taking this path, which was sketched by Kant, even though he said, okay, this is not the good path, but it sketched the path that everybody took later. So basically, even though it was not, according to him, a way to produce real knowledge or to get to the truth, in a certain way, this kind of path was more influential for later philosophy than the constructive part, or the part where using category to produce knowledge, because then the part of Kant which is not acceptable after Kant is that categories are a closed set of concepts, but on the opposite, this mechanism of dialectics, of this productive way according to which reason produces itself its own ideas and concepts in a sort of unfolding, productive conceptual unfolding, is an idea which was really important for the rest of the history of philosophy. Did I answer?
Yes, thank you very much.
So yes, then we cannot now to go really deeper in the issues, in the things, because I have a long program. Anyway, yeah. So what is important to stress here is that yes, Kant introduced this new definition of dialectic. And this new definition of dialectic is no more like, for example, in Plato, a way to get to the truth of ideas or to fix the first principles, like in Aristotle. But it's a way to produce ideas and to produce concepts, like thought itself is seen as a productive activity. Productive activity in the sense that it can produce its own beings, like the idea of God, or the idea of a first cause, or the idea of the totality of the world as sort of objects which are produced by reason itself without relying on senses. So this productive part of thinking will be very important for the rest of the history of philosophy. Even though, according to Kant, these productions are mere illusions. But he set this logic for the production of concepts. So because according to Kant, concepts and categories are there, and there is no explanation of the origin, or they are just given and they are not produced, but the way in which is addressing dialectic will be used as a method for explaining the genesis of the concepts and the possibility of producing concepts by synthesizing on concepts themselves. And this is really evident in Fichte's treatment of a dialectic. So Fichte, for example, showed that dialectic can get beyond the limits which were imposed by Kant. So Kant showed that reason finds contradiction when it tries to go beyond phenomena, when try to know something which is in itself rather than mere phenomena or things as they are given to us. And Fichte showed that actually this contradiction can be solved. So there is a possible solution for these antinomies of reasons. So Fichte tried to find the foundation of all human knowledge. So his work is the science of knowledge. So the idea is to find the principle from which all knowledge can unfold. So this principle that for Kant couldn't be reached. And of course, in order to fix this principle, to get to this principle, he has to overcome the contradiction between the I, so the thinking subject, and the non-I, which is the thing in itself. So Fichte is trying to show that this opposition, this contradiction, is not a mere contradiction, but it's something that can be solved. So the opposites are not opposites in the sense that they are contradictory, but it's possible to make a sort of synthesis of these concepts. So in order to solve these contradictions, or this contradiction between the thinking subject, or the I, and the objects, thing in itself, or the non-I. So for Kant, there is this duality. There is a duality between the subject and an exterior reality. So this exterior independent reality cannot be known because there is this alterity. So anytime we try to make a synthesis of the two, so to address the cause of both. So for example, God can be seen as the origin of reality and the subject in a way. So in order to explain the agreement between the two, but it's not possible. Or in the aesthetics, Kant show that there is this idea of an agreement between the understanding and reality, and the same thing in morality. So we need to think that there is an agreement between our need for freedom and reality. So reality must be made in a way which is which can allow for freedom. So there is this need for agreement, but we cannot prove it because we cannot get to this common origin of the things in themselves and the knowing subject. So there is this opposition, and that cannot be overcome according to Fichte. This can be done, and the aim of his philosophy is to show that there is this first principle explaining the possible agreement between the opposites. So it shows that even though there is this opposition and this contradiction between the I and the non-I, both can be considered as sharing a superior reality. And this superior reality is the reality of the absolute I. So the method for Fichte is to look for what is in common between the opposites. So the opposites are opposites because they share something. So in a certain way, it's an Aristotelian move against the Platonic separation that we have in Kant. So in Kant, we have this separation between things in themselves and the knowing subject. Fichte is saying we have to look for the commonality. And so the I and the non-I, they are both sharing reality because they are both real. And so this absolute reality is the reality of the absolute I. And so the I and the non-I, rather than being contradictory instances, they are just limiting themselves. So in order to be determined, the I must have a limit. So the I to be something must be limited, and what is limiting is the non-I. So the I and the non-I are sharing a common reality. They are limiting each other in being, in reality. And so this reality that they are sharing by limiting themselves, so by determining themselves. So the idea of knowledge for Fichte is that we know what is determined. So the reality of the non-I is knowable because it's determined, and it's determined because it's limiting the I. So they are co-determined in a certain way, and this allows for knowledge. And the fact that they are limiting each other implies that they are both part of a reality, on a higher reality, something that they are sharing, which is the absolute I. But of course, according to Fichte, cannot be known, but is the aim of knowledge. So the knowledge, according to Fichte, is this activity of striving for this ultimate identity, and this ultimate identity is the identity of the I and the non-I, which is this common reality in the absolute. But of course, according to Fichte, that cannot be known, because once the identity between the determined I and the absolute I is reached, there is no more determination, so knowledge is no more possible. But in a certain way, it's going beyond Kantian, the Kantian contradiction or Kantian illusion, to show that this synthesis of the opposites, or this overcoming of a contradiction, is possible, and it's the only way to address the principle of knowledge. So the origin of knowledge, what makes knowledge possible. So this is a first way in which we can see that Kantian dialectic is productive. So in Fichte philosophy is the mechanism that Kant used in his dialectic, which is the engine of knowledge. So it's by pursuing this dialectic, Kantian dialectic, so this way according to which reason is looking for the original synthesis of concepts, is the way to truth. And so this idea will be really important for Hegel. So the idea that the opposites are basically part of or are limiting themselves in a higher reality. And so the idea that the absolute knowledge of a principle of knowledge is basically the synthesis of the opposites. So this idea will be really important in Hegel's philosophy. Hegel's philosophy, even though it will change. So it's not accepting Fichte's philosophy as it is, but is using this same strategy to overcome the opposition or the contradiction that we find in Kant's dialectic. So the idea in Hegel is again that we cannot accept the skepticism which is still in Kant's solution. So according to Kant, things in themselves cannot be known. According to Hegel, there is no necessity for this conclusion, and we can say that his answer to Kant is very similar to the answer that Aristotle provides to Plato. So we said that according to Plato, we have these two different domains. So the domain of forms and the domain of the imperfect copies of the forms. And we cannot really know the forms. Aristotle answered to Plato that basically we don't have to see the forms or the ideas as something which is in another realm, in an which is inaccessible, which is separated from our reality, but forms basically are the essences of things. So forms, rather than being transcendent instances, are but the principle of motion of things, of real objects. So the forms are not in another reality, but forms are what allows for change, for motion in sensible things. So forms are basically essences, the principles of motion, of transformation, which are in things. So they cannot be known, not because they are in another realm, because they are inaccessible, but because they are just the tendency in things, what explain motion and the becoming of things. So in a similar way, Hegel explains that things in themselves, or what we think are things in themselves, are not basically metaphysical entities that we cannot access, but they are the concepts of things, concepts that are meant as the reason for the evolution of reality, for the becoming of reality. Things in themselves are not outside thinking, but as concepts, they are what explain the becoming of, the rational becoming of reality, of the world itself. So they are the principle of motion of reality as concepts. So the idea is that there is a sort of becoming of reality which depends on concepts, and so in a way that dialectic can be described as the principle of natural and spiritual life. The object of dialectic is the unfolding of concepts. So rather than looking for what is behind our representations, we have to look for the concepts which are informing our representations. So the dialectical process is a process that allows to achieve a conceptual systematicity of knowledge. So if we go back to the Fichte ideas, the idea was that we have the two opposites, and we can have a synthesis of the opposites, which allows to overcome the contradiction. So according to Hegel, we have to repeat this process in order to find the real condition of all knowledge. And it is the condition that for Kant was not accessible. So for Kant, we have the concepts. We take the concept as they are. We cannot explain how they are produced, how do they become. There is no synthesis of the concept, so there is no one principle from which we can deduce all the concepts. And anytime we use reason in order to systematize the concepts, we we fall in contradiction. Hegel shows that we can systematize knowledge and to organize concepts, showing how it's possible to achieve a higher and higher level of conceptual unity. So from the basic concepts of a particular to the idea or this absolute knowledge, which is the principle informing all reality. So rather than saying that dialectic produce these sort of illusions, the dialectical process is productive, and what is producing is this systematization or this unification of knowledge. So Kant called speculative reason this concept creating reason, and he said that he was producing illusions. And according to Hegel, the speculative reason became positive, so really productive. So this dialectical process lead to this possibility of the absolute idea in logic, or the absolute spirit in phenomenology, which is the principle of unity. So I'm really superficial on this because we don't have time to go deeper, but we will see things more in details because we have a reading from Hegel just to address dialectics, Hegelian dialectics more in details. So we could say that we have two different conceptions. It's not two different conceptions, but we can focus on two different dialectical processes in Hegel. So we have a dialectical process which is a historical one. So history is itself a dialectical process, or we can concentrate on logic as the unfolding of concepts, so this mechanism for producing concepts of higher and higher order to achieve the unity. Both of them will be really influential in the history of philosophy. So the part of the historical unfolding of, for example, different social organization will be really influential in Marx dialectic, for example, and the logic as this unfolding of concepts, of a way in which we can produce new concepts by reflecting on concepts, is really producing in contemporary philosophy, for example. So Hegelian dialectic is known to be this kind of threefold process. So we have, usually we describe this Hegelian dialectic as having triadic becoming or unfolding. So we have a thesis, an antithesis, and then we usually we say a synthesis. So we have these two opposition, this contradiction, and then the solution of the contradiction. This solution is called by Hegel Aufhebung, which is translated as sublation or overcoming, in the sense that the two opposites are preserved in the synthesis. So it's not a way of eliminating the contradiction or the opposites, but it's a way of going to an higher level of synthesis. So, and of course, at any stage, you can say that any stage is the product of the previous synthesis. And this process of overcoming or sublation is also called the moment of negation of negation. So we can make an example. In the logic, we have this dialectic of existence of the very beginning of Hegel's logic. So we have being, which is the moment of a thesis, if you want, so pure being. But of course, pure being is then understood because it's opposed to nothing. So if there is something which is, it's limited by something which is not. So being is defined by nothing. So there is this moment in which being and nothing are indistinguishable, which is the moment of contradiction, of negation. And then negation of negation is a way to achieve a superior synthesis of the opposite, so being and nothing, in the unity of becoming. So becoming is the synthesis of the opposites, so the becoming of the opposites, in the sense that it's not eliminating being and nothing, but showing that the concepts of being and nothing depends on these concepts of becoming. So yes, this negation of negation is the idea that the contradiction is solved in a superior synthesis. So by providing the original unity of the concept. So Hegel dialectic is more a dialectical dividing, in the sense that so when it's narrated, we go from one thing like being to its opposite and then the synthesis, but basically the synthesis is possible. So the synthesis basically is preceding the opposition. So the problem, which is the problem in Kant philosophy, and which is the problem which is motivating most of the idealism, is that in Kant system, for example, there is no ground to say, to justify that we can the application of a concept to reality. So there is no necessity for the synthesis. So starting from Fichte, the idea is that we justify the application of concept because we show that concepts are coming from a previous common ground. So here the absolute idea is rationality, or the common ground of all reality and all concepts. So the synthesis is basically to show the is not an artificial synthesis of the opposites, but it's showing that these opposites are part or depends on a higher level concept or idea, which is the ground for their own reality. So in this sense, there is a production of the form and the content at the same time. So it's not just a formal logic, but it's there is an ontological implication on this unfolding of a concept. So we said that we have this historical dimension of dialectics. So history is dialectical, and then we have the narrower version, which is the logic, and here we have the revelation, as Hegel says, the cognitive revelation of the lawfulness inherent in the very nature of thought. And of course, they are linked together. So in the logic, the aim is to understand these laws of thinking, these laws of the unfolding of concepts, so the way in which concepts are related to each other, and the way in which we can find the reasons for the concepts that we use. So the systematization of the concepts that we use. And Messages coming from the chat.
I think Federico had some internet connection problems, but I do not have any. I think you are fine.
Okay. So I need to go to speed up because we are a little late. So anyway, we will see Hegel's dialectic more in details later. What we need for the moment is that we have this way of going beyond Kant by using dialectic in a positive way, so in a productive way, by explaining at the same time the progress in the knowledge of knowledge, so the progress in the knowledge of the law of thinking. So the laws of thinking are dialectical, and the dialectical discovery of the laws of thinking entails the dialectical unfolding of reality. So the stages of knowledge. So in Hegel's system, we have stages of knowledge, which are comprehension of the conceptual structure, which are unfolding one after the other, and these different stages in the comprehension of thought itself, of the laws of thought, corresponds to a certain representation of reality, of a certain stage of the comprehension of reality. So when we are in the social sphere, we can say that the comprehension of the laws of thought corresponds to a specific kind of society, and so the goal is to get to this production of a reality, so a social reality, a political reality, which is in agreement with the requirement of freedom. So once thought understands itself or comes to know itself, it also comes to produce the reality which is in agreement, which is adequate to its this consciousness of its own needs. One thing to be stressed is that according to Hegel, the analysis of language is essential to understand these laws of thinking, so the laws according to which thought unfold. And as he says in the second introduction to the logic, he says that the forms of thought are first set out and stored in human language. And one can hardly be reminded often enough nowadays that thought is what differentiates the human being from the beast. In everything that the human being has interiorized, in everything that in some way or other has become for him a representation, in whatever he has made his own, whereas language penetrated, and everything that he transforms into language and expresses in it contains a category, whether concealed, mixed, or well-defined. So the analysis of language basically allows to understand the concepts which are used, and also this history of the unfolding of a concept. So I think that, yeah, I mean, it's really superficial way of dealing with Hegel's dialectic, which is one of the most complicated things in the history of philosophy. What we need to keep in mind is this idea that dialectic is productive in the sense that it allows for the comprehension of the laws of thinking, and this comprehension of the laws of thinking is productive engine of thinking itself, and of course of the correlated reality. So anytime there is a progress in this knowledge of the laws of thinking, we also have a progress in the production of the reality, which is correlated to this stage of the knowledge of the laws of thinking themselves. So now we pass to a Marxist dialectic, so we don't have a lot of time. I try to speed. So we can say very briefly that Marxist dialectic is a form of Hegelian dialectic, which works in the opposite way. I quote Marx to explain this. Marx says, my dialectic method is not only different from the Hegelian, but is its direct opposite. To Hegel, the life process of the human brain, the process of thinking, which under the name of the idea, he even transforms into an independent subject, is the demiurgos of the real world, and the real world is only the external phenomenal form of the idea. With me, on the contrary, the idea is nothing else than the material world reflected by the human mind and translated into forms of thought. So according to Hegel, the idea is the principle of everything. So reality depends on the idea. So it's a process of thinking, which is understanding the laws of thinking, which produces reality. According to Hegel, to Marx, on the contrary, the material conditions, social conditions, produces the correspondent way of thinking. So it's a materialism, dialectical materialism, because the opposites are in reality. So there is a contrast, an opposition, a tension in reality, especially in social reality, and this opposition is the condition for concepts, idea, and for the evolution of thinking. So the forces are in matter rather than being in thinking. So, for example, in dialectical materialism, we have contradictions like class struggle is the first example of real material contradiction. So class struggle is this primary contradiction, which is a real social contradiction. And Marxist dialectic as a methodology is trying to study how this contradiction will be overcome or resolved by producing a new social situation. So here we have a philosophical contradiction, which is central to the development of dialectics, even though the engine is on the side of the real material conditions. So history is the result of material condition rather than the result of the unfolding of concepts. So concepts are unfolding because material conditions are changing. And there is this, of course, dialectical perspective on history. So this sort of revolution or change is seen in a deterministic way by this scientific dialectical way of so there is a sort of scientific necessity because so political or material structure are studied in a scientific way, so they are responding to these dialectical laws. So basically the conclusion is that the revolution is necessary. There is a sort of end of history which can be addressed. So this is one of the reasons why Marx dialectic will be criticized later.
Anna?
Yes.
One direct question were you speaking about like Soviet style Marxist Leninism or like Marxism and the one that was historically the most impactful, or about Marx writing himself?
Yeah, no, I'm so now at the moment I'm just it's just very, very general, absolutely general. During the class we will read Marx texts. Here is just a way of addressing in a really general way what is the difference between an Hegelian and materialist, an Hegelian dialectic and a materialist dialectic. I'm not going deeper in the details.
No, okay, yeah, okay, thanks.
Yeah, sorry, because I don't have time, so it was absolutely general. Then, of course, there are interpretations, and yes, for the Lenin point of view, yes, the material conditions are stronger than in Marx, and I mean, yeah, so Lenin is transforming Marx dialectic in a dialectical materialism, which is a new transformation in a certain way, but we cannot go in deeper there. Anyway, just for the introduction, the main concept is that with the new materialistic view on dialectic, the engine of change is in matter, in society. So it's the real opposition, the real tensions, the real contradictions in reality which produce the historical becoming and the becoming of ideas. So just to say that there is this reversal of dialectic in materialism. For the Frankfurt School, we have another view on dialectic. So to say it in a very synthetic way, we could say that the problem, according to Adorno, for example, is that we cannot support a dialectic aiming to a totality. So he's accusing Hegel as well as Marx of ending into a totality or ending the process to an identity. So in the case of Hegel is more evident. So we have the struggle is to go to the identity of the idea as the principle or achievement of knowledge. In Marx also there is a sort of teleology of a process, and this tendency is criticized by Adorno. He said, okay, we cannot accept this final identity or the final totalization of a process. So according to his negative dialectic, for example, identity of a final identity is not possible, is what is impossible. So we have a dialectic, we have a process unfolding, but no identity or no totality can be achieved, and this is because there is always something, there is always an excess on the side of the object with respect to the concept. So it's a negative dialectic because there is no real solution of the antithesis, of a contradiction, because the objects of the other, the alterity, cannot really be bring into a superior unity. And this is because there is always something more in reality than in the concept. So according to Adorno, anytime that a concept or an idea is saying that is the totality or is assumed to be the idea or the identity or the concept, is forgetting part of the reality which resists to conceptualization. But what is important according to Adorno is that even though this negativity cannot be really solved, so the opposition or the tension, the real tension, cannot really be solved, cannot be really overcome. It's this excess on the side of reality, which is the engine for changement, for change, for the process, for the evolution. It's because any idea or any concept cannot really absorb the totality of its opposite or the alterity, that we need to produce new ideas or new concepts. So this negative dialectic is revealing the limits of knowledge rather than the possibility of the achievement of absolute knowledge. Of course, these limits of knowledge are different from the Kantian limits of knowledge in the sense that it's not a thing in itself, but it's an impossibility of knowing reality. There is always something in reality which is escaping concepts, and so concepts are kind of trying to develop in order to catch what is escaping at any time. And this is the engine of the dialectical process. So according to Adorno, the task of philosophy is to produce or to show this excess which cannot be resumed in ideology. So the problem there is that or the process of enlightenment ended up in authoritarian systems. So Adorno is writing before, during, and after the Second World War. So in Germany, so the problem was the installation of authoritarian systems. So the idea is that we cannot support an authoritarian view of truth, like one truth which is valid universally, and we have to use philosophy in order to support or to show that something is always escaping to any effort of totalization, and that the effort of totalization is overlooking the real alterity or the heterogeneity of the real, so these real tensions that cannot be solved. And another interpretation of materialist dialectic is the Althusser's one. We will talk about him during the classes. We will read some texts. One important concept here is that according to Althusser, there is a dialectic without subject, in the sense that the subject or the identity or the consciousness is not the protagonist of dialectic, but it's a mere product of the dialectical process. So the subject is a construction which depends on the dialectical process. So it's a dialectic without subject, and the subject is subject and the object, so the relation between the subject and the object. So they are produced as correlated by this dialectical process itself, which is considered from the point of view of structuralism. So we have a sort of structure which is becoming, and any stage of the becoming of a structure produce subject and objects as correlated entities, and this implies that there is no definition of a human or no definition of a subject, which is preceding the dialectical process. So any definition of a subject, any definition of a human depends on the stage of a dialectical process, ideal process, because it concerns conceptual structures. So it's a dialectic without subject and without a definition of the human being. So the human being is not the individual. Yes, there is no definition of human being which precedes the dialectical stage to which it corresponds as a product. So this is the novelty which was introduced by Althusser. And this is the reason why, for example, Althusser is criticized by Badiou. So the problem between them is that Badiou is saying, okay, but you cannot conceive a revolution without a subject. You need first the subject and then the revolution. And Althusser said, no, but the subject is a product of revolution. So, okay. Then we will see dialectic in pragmatism with Peirce. But I think you know that we will see then, because I think that the time is until 7:30, so we think that we have 15 minutes left. And so recursivity, we will see it reading Yukui. And I want to go just to the conclusions now really quickly. So as a conclusion, we can say that dialectic in general is a way of putting ideas to a critical test by attempting to expose contradiction and eliminate them. What is important is that any particular claim is assessed in a situation of public discussion, and the idea is that what is implied is a collective and a collective effort. In contemporary dialectics, or in the way in which dialectic is addressed today as argumentation theory, the focus is about the pragmatic application of a collaborative method which allows to go from opinion to belief. So the idea is not really that we get to truth, so that we reach something like an absolute truth, but that we can secure our belief. So dialectic is a procedure to test the belief, and usually the belief are tested by the commitment, by the strength of our commitment to them.
Anna, if you could
Yes.
refocus your camera, we can't see you properly. Thank you.
You see me? No?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, so just to finish, okay, so yes. Okay, so I think that the important thing for to finish with this contemporary dialectic is this normative purpose of dialectic. So for normative purpose, I mean that the idea is to develop criteria for argumentation in order to satisfy the need of discriminating between rational arguments or reasonable arguments and arguments which are not. So because only if we are we have the standards of reasonableness of the arguments, we can engage in a dialectical discussion. So dialectic today is a way of setting this criteria for develop the possibility of enter in a rational confrontation, a rational debate. And to finish, we have yes, these experiments which are being made in order to implement this dialectic methodology in artificial intelligence. So experiments, for example, for medical diagnosis, where we have to recreate, to simulate, to simulate this reasoning, to go from premises to conclusions. And other systems which are really trying to use dialectic, not in the sense of discovering the truth, but dialectic as a sort of logic, as a sort of instrument providing the tools for building, for producing any kind of rational discussion. So it's not a way of looking for one truth or the truth or some metaphysical reality, but dialectic is a methodology which is providing the criteria of a framework for any kind of rational inquiry, a rational inquiry which is developing in a collaborative and social situation. Okay, so I think that I can stop with the introduction. And we will see all the things more in details in the next weeks. You have any question, general question, precise question?
I mean, I've already asked one, so I don't want to, if other people would like to go first. So if no one else does have a question, I have a general question that'll take us back to the Hegel Fichte and sort of navigate, you know, what oftentimes I suppose is this conflation with, you know, this mantra that we hear: thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And of course, you know, this is Fichte's thought to some degree. It is associated, I think, at least, you know, in the popular view, as Hegel's thought. And I think that we could probably understand sort of why this misconception develops, that Hegel has in his general systematization a sort of fondness for threes, and the unfolding of his dialectics kind of seems to move from a one-sided claim to an opposing one-sided claim, and then to a third claim that addresses the shortcomings of both. But my question is sort of, you know, would you say that that is where the superficial resemblance ends, and whether, you know, Hegel sees movement and being as thought as occurring through contradiction, but this being more so the inability of any one identity to constitute itself without simultaneously negating itself, and therefore contradiction not being merely opposition. That is, it's not the assertion of a thesis and then the contrary antithesis, and that instead Hegelian contradiction occurs when a position follows its own logic and thereby finds itself at ends with itself. That is, Hegel sees a contradiction as there being no identity or position that can function as a stable thesis to begin with. That a thesis is never an isolated starting point that subsequently confronts an antithesis, but instead, and maybe on the contrary to this even, that every position ultimately undermines itself by exposing its own internal division. And also, whether you sort of, if you agree with that, do you find yourself, and I know you're a bit more of a Schellingian, but of course you do a bit of work on Hegel, how you find yourself contending with those who see this as pathology in Hegel and therefore read Hegel as a psychoanalytic thinker or a proto-psychoanalytic thinker because of this constitutive lack.
I'm not really interested in these psychoanalytic readings of Hegel, or I mean, because of course can be, I mean, no problem at a general level, but for me, and this is really personal, the aim or the goal is not to find something which is inside, but more something which is outside. So in the sense that of course we can read with like the truth is already there and we forgot it, like in Plato. So the soul knew the truth, but he forgot it. So it's a way of remembering what is lost. So basically, there is no way out from the subject. I think that what is interesting is to exit the subject. So what is interesting for me in the Fichtean system is that this absolute identity that cannot be reached is a way of dissolving subjectivity itself. So I think that the loss is the goal rather than the beginning. And also my reading of Hegel, more personal one, is to see the achievement of absolute knowledge or the last stage of idea as a way of losing subjectivity rather than assessing it. I think that this idea of identity must be seen as a way of overcoming identity in a certain way. So
do you find some linkage between, because I think this is a very important point that oftentimes is a bit overlooked in Hegel's thought, but there in Fichte's thought, you know, and I think you mentioned this once, he's one of like the few contemporaries of Maimon that seems to have developed Maimon in the spirit of Kant or Kantianism, to ensure that the finite knowledge rests on some type of foundation. And there's this term that Fichte uses, aesthetic, and it is, you know, revived in a lot of contemporary thinkers. Larwell uses aesthetic quite a bit. Aesthetic assumes that the function of addressing the principles that are capable of legitimizing our limited knowledge, you know, that this can function without allowing us to exceed the limits of our constitutive finitude, that we propose to seek the most absolute principle, the absolutely unconditioned principle of human knowledge, and if this principle is truly the most absolute, it cannot be defined nor demonstrated. Would you see any linkage between this and what you just remarked upon in regards to Hegel and that's, yeah, more specifically, I suppose, you know, that Hegel regards achievement of absolute as losing of subjectivity?
Yeah, so I think that it's there is this in Fichte the judgment which is fixing the first principle is an infinite judgment, and an infinite judgment is a judgment to the limit. So the example, really easy example, is a circle and how you call it, a figure with more sides, polygon. So if you have a polygon, you can add an infinity of sides, but you will never get the circle. So according to Fichte, the difference between the I determined I, like the finite I, and the absolute one is the same relation that we have between a polygon and a circle. So there is an identity. It's not impossible, but it's an identity to infinity. But when the polygon reaches the circle, is no more a polygon, so the identity is lost. And what produced the engine of knowledge in Fichte is the difference between the polygon and the circle. So the I is the polygon, the non-I is what is between the circle and the polygon. So this is the non-I, the reality to be known. So by enlarging the number of the sides, the polygon is getting more closer to the circle and is including more reality of the non-I. So knowledge is improving. But the improvement of knowledge bring the limited I to get closer to the identity of the absolute I, where there is no more knowledge, because there is no determination. So it's a sort of dissolution. I think that Hegel is doing something different. So is in a certain way using the same idea, in the sense that in order to prove a consistency of different concepts, one needs to show that they are sharing some reality or some higher concept. So it's a logic of division. And he says that the German word for the concept is Urteil, saying that it's a sort of split. So the concept of becoming is what supports the opposition between being and nothing. So when we look for the unity, of course, we start from the separated or opposite concepts, but they are not really opposites, because they are sharing in a certain way the same unity in the concept of becoming. So it's because there is the unity of our concept that we are allowed to define together, because the first phase is a co-definition of the opposite. So the negation comes because one terms cannot be defined but by passing through the opposite. So it's a co-determination in a certain way, that then this co-determination is shown to be a contradiction, but at the beginning it's just opposition and co-determination, and then it's draw to contradiction in order to show that this co-determination depends on a superior concept. What happens at the end? It's not like in Fichte, where what is the aim is the identity of the I limited one and the absolute one, but the idea is that the subject is knowing itself. So in Fichte there is the absolute I is not knowing itself, it's just striving for the identity, for the final identity. In Hegel, the identity is the identity of self-knowledge. So any phase or any step is a way in which the absolute subject is knowing itself. So when we have a difference between subject and object, it is it's a way of representing the self-reflection. So it's like the absolute subject is reflecting on itself in order to know itself. And the first way in which it knows itself is by taking one part, we could say, itself as an object and itself as a subject. And this is the first opposition. But the opposition is determined by the self-reflecting knowledge, but we don't have in Fichte.
So the reflective judgment is, you would say, is what is lost in Fichte, or not present in Fichte, but allows
in
for.
Fichte, in Fichte there is no the absolute subject is doing nothing. The absolute subject is not knowing itself. The only act, the only action of the absolute subject is limiting itself. So to go from the absolute to existence, the act is a cut. So it's like the absolute subject cut itself. By this cut, is producing two codetermined reality. And reality is because they are determined, because they are limited. In Hegel, it is different because there is no this cut between object and subject, which is happening like this first act of positing. So in Fichte, everything is starting with positing. And the positing is, okay, I determine one reality. By determining one reality, I'm determining also what is limiting this. In Hegel, the first act is a reflection, is a knowledge, is like knowledge of itself. So it's not, so the opposition is a different one. So it's not the reality which is split between the subject and the object, like in Fichte, but is the subject which is split. So the subject is reflecting on itself, creating the object, but the object in Hegel is not different from the subject since the beginning, because the object is just the result of a reflection. But what is reflected is an originary identity. So the identity is never put in question. It's always the ground for all the divisions, because in an act of reflection, there is no real split of identity, but the identity is the ground for the possibility of a reflection. So that's why absolute knowledge is possible, because it was there since the beginning. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Anna, Federico has he raised a question about the presentations and how you prefer to assign them. Should we leave time next session so they can choose, or should we do this by email?
I think that we can do this by email, maybe, or
Sure.
try to start by email. So if anybody can send an email with a preference for the date, maybe it's better. And then
yeah,
we can start from the emails to try to have a list or a schedule next week.
okay. And a selection of presentation topics and response topics as well would be great.
Yeah, if we could, maybe have emails with the date, the topic, and also people saying when they are available to be respondents. then maybe next week, next Saturday, we will be able to make a schedule and rearrange if we have probably too many presentations the same day or.
Sounds good.
And yeah, I don't know how many people are online in this moment, but
Right
do I send an email to everybody in order to ask about?
Yeah, I think that would work.
Okay. Okay, so I send an email to everybody to try to decide dates and topics.
Fantastic.
Any other questions, or is it too late maybe? Okay, so maybe we can ask other questions next week if you have. Anyway, it was just really, really superficial and just meant to be an introduction to the different topics, but we will see more in details during the seminar.
Great, Anna. Thank you very much for this first session.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you
a lot, Anna.
Thank you.
It was
You
fantastic.
Thank you.
Bye.
Saturday. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.